Right, my talk's called The Two Ecosystems. Tell you a bit about myself first. I've done a degree in conservation, and while I was doing my degree in conservation, I figured out that the issue isn't what's happening in nature, it's what's happening at home. So like consumerism and stuff like that. So that's why I decided to start looking into permaculture and other methods of feeding people so that they stop taking away from my passion, which is the ecosystem, nature, basically. So what is Planet Earth? Planet Earth, it's a collection of ecosystems. There's terrestrial, there's marine, there's freshwater, there's arboreal, which is trees, if you don't know what that is, and then there's a new one, which is urbanial, which is in the urban environment. So an ecosystem is a community of living organisms in conjunction with non-living components in the environment interacting as a system. Biotic, which is living, and abiotic, which is non-living components. They're linked together through nutrient cycles and energy flows. Energy, water, carbon, nitrogen, soil nutrients and minerals are all the abiotic, which is the non-living components of an ecosystem. Microbes, animals and plants are essential biotic components of an ecosystem, so they all work together. And they're also dynamic entities, so they adapt to changes, and all of them are a result of past disturbances. So here's a couple of the cycles that go on in nature. There's the carbon cycle. So trees and plants, they absorb carbon and release oxygen. Then the leaves fall and then that carbon's locked in the soil. Or animals eat the leaves and then their decomposing waste locks the carbon in the soil. Or there's algae in the sea, which absorbs carbon, which is eaten by fish and other algae eaters, which is then absorbed. So all these systems are amazing for stopping climate change, essentially. Nitrogen cycle, which is to do with the soil. So nitrogen is the most abundant gas in the universe, or in this universe. It finds in the soil many ways. It gets rained down, it gets snowed down, or lightning. There's different plants like legumes like alfalfa and clover, which fix it from the air and put it into the soil. Animal waste puts ammonia into the soil, and then bacteria convert it into nitrates, which plants eat. And that's the cycle, that's the nitrogen cycle. It goes into the air, into the ground, into the plants, into the ground, into the plants. So it's a cycle just like permaculture is. There's the water cycle, which is the same. Condensation takes it to the skies, it's rained down, it hydrates the whole system all the way down, and then goes back to the sea where it is recycled and just keeps going and keeps going. Then there's the soil. Like the soil, there's so many different parts of the soil. There's the antibiotic for plant resistance, so different microbes get different elements out of like different organic matter, and it has different effects on the plant basically. So there's the nitrifying, which make nitrates. There's phosphate solubilizing bacteria, which make phosphates, and it goes up into the plant, into the leaves, and then it is dropped by the leaves and then back into the soil, and it's a cycle. And with it being natural, you have the fungi and the bacteria, which also bind the soil, so there's not any runoff. So it's really good for the structure of the soil. So yeah, I'm going to go through the different ecosystems and examples of how they work. So this is Yellowstone in like the 70s and the 80s, and it was a mess, and the reason it was a mess is because there was too many deer and not enough trees. So they introduced wolves into the ecosystem. When they introduced wolves, they started preying on the deer, which made carrion for ravens and crows, and also made carrion for coyotes, which are naturally scavengers, but without the wolves there who were doing the kills, they had to prey on the rabbits. So the rabbit numbers were going down because of the coyote numbers. Wolves also kill coyotes because coyotes follow them around, and they're a competition. So yeah, then there became more rabbits, which was food for hawks and foxes and badgers. Also, when the wolves pressured the deer started to migrate to different areas, and they stayed away from the water and they stayed away from the valleys where they get trapped. So more trees started to grow back, which brought more birds back, and also brought insects back. So the insects were pollinating the trees and pollinating the plants, and then the birds were dispersing the seeds. So very quickly the forestscape began to come back. It also brought the beavers. They didn't reintroduce the beavers. The beavers were extinct in the area, and they just came back out of nowhere. And obviously they're ecosystem engineers, so they chew the wood, they make dams, they make pools for certain animals such as otters and salmon to nest, and also reptiles and amphibians. And also bears came into the equation. Bears mostly eat fish, berries and honey. So the insects coming back, the birds coming back, the salmon coming back, they've benefited the bears. They don't really hunt deer, so introducing an apex predator into the ecosystem completely fixed it without having to do anything else. And it shows that the wolf is responsible for everything in that ecosystem. So this is Yellowstone now. You can see how, you can't really see, it's a bit dark, but before the deer were staying near the river because obviously they drink water, so they were eating the foliage around the river and in the valleys, which was causing runoff into the rivers, which was basically widening the rivers. And the root systems of the trees showed up the banks of the rivers, stopped the runoff, and now you can see the river runs a flow. It runs as a river. It's still got, you can still see the damage that it caused originally, like how wide it is, but you can see grass growing in the middle, which has shored it up, which means the river runs solid, and there's less runoff, which means less nutrients in the water, which means the plant flora don't get too much, end up breaking down, and then something called eutrophication, which I'll talk about later, doesn't kill the rivers basically. So yeah, then there's marine. At the moment the seas are in a sorry state. There's too much algae, the corals are dying off, and the reason for this is these species, who are the algae eaters, they're not around anymore. They're low in numbers, and they're not cleaning the algae off the coral, so the coral can't eat, and they're not eating the algae, so the algae's covering the surface of the sea. No light's penetrating through, and the algae's also absorbing oxygen, which is making everything sick. And the reason all these fish are low is because these species are becoming abundant, and these species eat the fish, the coral fish, and the algae eaters. And the reason they're becoming abundant is because the apex predator isn't there, the shark. They're down 95% in numbers, probably since the start of this talk. About 3,000 were killed in this amount of time.
Why? What kills them?
Well, it's mostly for shark fin soup. There's a thing called shark fin soup,
Oh, yeah.
and yeah, it's in China basically, and it's sort of like it's basically to look hard essentially. They're just it's got no beneficial, like in terms of nutrients or anything like that. It's just a stature.
They kill them all.
The sea will fill with algae, which will absorb all the oxygen, and the planet will die essentially. And they're already 95% down in numbers, and about 100 million are killed each year. So that's how important they are to the ecosystem, and how imbalanced the ecosystem is, and why it is important that we start growing our own food and stop paying into corporations and just basically think essentially. But yeah, sharks, the main prey is sick fish, and because there's not that many more diseases in the sea, because they're not taking out the fish who are sick. So fresh water as well, which have gone for the crocodilians. The crocodilians eat everything pretty much, and they're not very picky, which serves a thing. And then they poo, which is food for bacteria, which converts the ammonia into nitrites and then into nitrates, which then grows plants, the flora of the rivers and flora on the side of the rivers, which brings in another prey for the crocodiles, which is a terrestrial animal, They come for water, and also if there's abundance of flora on the side of the river, they're more likely to come to that part of the river. So the crocodiles eat the wildebeest, which is also food for the other like catfish, are another thing that'll eat anything, and the turtles. So they bring nutrients and minerals from outside the water into the water, and vice versa, because they lay around 90 highly nutritious eggs, which, if you know anything about crocodile ecology, it's on average one survives out of those 90. Animals from the water, like monitor lizards, and also animals from the terrestrial, like weasels, they feed on the eggs. So they're very much the shaman of the animal world. They're between worlds. They're in the water, they're out the water, and they bring stuff from out the water into the water, and vice versa, out the water into the water, and then that feeds an whole ecosystem. So from, say, a crocodile eats a fish, that energy could end up hundreds of miles away in the nest of an eagle, just because the way it lays its eggs on land. Also, they don't allow for settlement, so any species such as the catfish or anything like that, they don't stay in the same place because of the pressure from the crocodile. It's wiser to move. They also create niche habitats. They bury in the ground, basically. They go down and they bury, and they make deep pools for amphibians and stuff like that. And they also dig dens on the outside, which is also homes for other animals. And they tidy up the mess. They eat everything. They eat all the carrion that's left. Anything that dies on the side of the river, a crocodile will consume. So yeah, then there's the arboreal, which is the trees. Trees create nuts. They also create wood, which is carbon. Fruit, which is nitrogen, and then leaves, which is nitrogen, which, if you saw from the cycles before, they're all very important parts of the soil, and also for carbon sequestration from the environment. So yeah, the fruit and the nuts, they feed certain animals like toucans and monkeys and squirrels and parrots, a whole array of species, including us as well. And then they feed the apex predators, which are at the top, which will manage the system. There's also insects, which will chew the wood, and there's also caterpillars, which will chew the nitrogen, which is whatever waste is dropped to the bottom, which is fed on fungi and bacteria, which is then absorbed by the different organisms in the soil, converted into nitrates, which then go up the roots into the tree, and the whole thing starts over again. Urbanial. You got the human, who likes to throw food away, makes a load of rubbish, which draws in certain animals, which draws in slightly scarier animals. But what humans are also doing, well, I won't call bees as pets, but they bring bees into the urban environment, and the big problem with bees is in the countryside. They're susceptible to the pesticides that we're using in unsustainable agriculture, and they're losing the resistance to parasites. So that's one good thing what humans are doing. They're bringing bees into the city, and it's sort of like a haven. And our fascination with gardening flowers is also helping that. So that's sort of a good thing. But even in the city, animals have found a way to keep these cycles going, which are in nature. So yeah, at the moment there's invasive species in the country which are causing issues. So Himalayan balsam, giant hogweed, which basically they grow quicker than our native plants. They outcompete them, but they also die earlier because they're from hotter countries. And then the grey squirrel, which is also an invasive species, which is outcompeting the native red squirrel. And then the mink, which I don't know if they evolved in a time where food was sparse, but they collect the psychopathic killers really, and they kill and kill and kill and kill and collect and collect and collect and collect. So they're massive problems, as well as cats. They're also an invasive species in this country, which are killing billions of birds, but that's another story. There's bad practices which are going on, such as pesticides, inorganic fertilisers, synthetic fertilisers, monocropping, which we've heard quite a lot about, effluent release, laundry, bad laundry stuff, and rubbish as well. Most of these things, like the monocropping, it doesn't lead it. The substrate isn't as binded as it would be in an organic farm in multi-cropping. The pesticides, they're killing the microbes, which are also like the fungi, the fungal hyphae are not binding the soil. And everything else is releasing nutrients into the water, which is causing overgrowth of plants, which in winter die off, absorbed by bacteria, which takes the oxygen out of the water, and then that system's killed. And that's why these bad practices are how they are affecting nature. So yeah, this is how it works with the synthetic fertilisers. With organic farming, yeah, you feed the soil, which you can't quite see at the top there. Organic matter goes in, microbes convert them into nutrients, and then the plant absorbs them. Whereas synthetic, you're just putting the nutrients straight in there, so all the other biotic influence in there isn't there. So the soil's not being binded, there's no connection with the plant and the soil. And basically it's killing the soil. And that's what happens. Runoff of nitrates and phosphates, which is what feed plants, it causes an overgrow of plants. Increase algal growth as well, which stops sunlight from going into the water, and the plants photosynthesizing, they then die. Bacteria breaks down the organic matter, takes the oxygen out of the water, and then that bit of water is dead basically. That's called eutrophication. And that's a before and after of what happens when eutrophication happens. And that's
do something with the algae. Algae contains up to between 15 and 30% lipids.
Yeah.
So you can do oil extraction, you can also use it for green organic compost.
Yeah, there is all that, and it just depends on who's going to do it, but the fact still remains is that the nitrates and the phosphates are still running into the water. Yeah. So why not just do organic farming and just and just cut the whole thing out, because
you have a problem that you could then use to help clean up and
yeah, it's just the way the government operates really. They're not looking at that. Yeah, it's just they're not interested in doing that for whatever reason. Like their parasitic nature doesn't allow them to do it. It's the same with like Japanese knotweed. It's really medicinal. Yet we inject it with herbicides like glyphosate to kill it instead of cropping it or turning it into biochar or anything like that. So yeah, within nature there's also parasites, which is rather nasty looking things really. The parasites come in when the immune system's weakened, and all the chemicals that we're putting into things are weakening the immune system of all the animals basically. Like an example. Yeah, I'll come on to that.
Why parasites look so scared?
Because they are, yeah. So, like, does anyone know what the Varroa Mite is? Yeah, exactly. A Varroa Mite, it's a parasite of bees, and because there's pesticides, it's confusing the bees, and they're losing their ability to sense these things. And these parasites are ridiculously clever. This is something that one of my lecturers did at uni, and within 3 hours they've changed the Varroa Mite changed its chemical signature from an adult bee to a larva. Completely changed the whole thing, changed the structure of the chemical, brought in new chemicals, and that's just 3 hours, and that's how much of an advantage they got over the bees. So weakening the bees.
Sorry, I didn't understand what you said. What does it do to the bee?
It confuses them, it stupefies them, like chemicals do to us. Like, and the Varroa Mite.
Does it inject something into the bee?
No. Basically, it just changes its chemical signature. Bees don't really see. They communicate with scents basically. So they release a chemical, and they have different chemicals for different behaviours and different chemicals for different life stages of the bee. And the Varroa Mite has learnt to change its chemical signature from the adult bee to the larva. So basically, it comes in on the bee. It gets in smelling like an adult bee. It gets into the nesting area, and then within 3 hours, it smells like the larva, and then it just eats the larva. and then a bee comes in, it gets on the bee, and then it goes off to the next hive, and that's how it kills hives. And that's the big problem. That's why the bees are dying, and that's why the urban landscape is good, because there's no pesticides in the urban landscape, so they have a better chance against the Varroa Mite.
Is there anything to kill that thing?
Could make bees a lot healthier by taking real crap.
Yeah, we just have to stop using pesticides basically, and then the bees' immune system, the bees will be smart enough to figure out that they're there, but they're that evolved at the parasites, and it's very difficult. I've got a friend who's trying to figure it out, but the parasites they disease the hive basically, and there's different strains of the disease, but it all stems from us weakening them with pesticides. So that's what's happening with the bees. That's why you're seeing bee graffiti everywhere, because
They're not in pesticide, they're just, do they feed on pesticides? These
Well,
things, mice?
No. The bees are being affected by the pesticides. So basically, the bees collect pollen from fields where pesticides have been sprayed, and then the pesticides react with their brains, basically, just like chemicals do with ours, and they're not as alert as they would be.
So when the mites come in, they like camouflage themselves by giving off the same scent.
Mm-hmm. And then
So
change
it
them.
goes to the hive and you need all the bees that come into it and they destroy the
Is
hive.
this the main reason why the recent
Yeah.
years and years the bees were dying out?
Yeah. Exactly. So it's all parasites, and then you'll start to see that with the human ecosystems, the reason why our practices are so crazy is because we're under control, basically. The majority. There won't be too many in here, because a lot of people in the Wondering are eating healthy diets and are on that journey of healing themselves, but the majority of society will have parasites, and they'll be...
Do scientists know, actually, with this, what you said? Do they know?
Yeah. My good friend's like doing a PhD in it with the bees, and they're trying to figure out ways of stopping it. But the main way is to clean up our bad practices in agriculture. That's the main way to do it. But yeah, going...
Poisoned by us,
Yeah.
so they can't fight off the mites.
And they're poisoning us so that we can't fight off the mites, and then the mites are controlling us, and that's basically what happens. So yeah, the human ecosystems, within you there's 100 trillion microorganisms, and in terms of genes, in terms of genetics, there's 10 times more microbial genes in us than there is human genes. So we can't see ourselves as one organism. We're many organisms. We're an ecosystem. So in terms of health, the best way to see yourself and heal yourself is to heal yourself as an ecosystem, like with permaculture principles, basically, just slightly differ in terms of what you put into the system, basically. So yeah, it's hundreds of different species all working together in ways that leave our minds mysteriously free to focus on getting our bodies to the office and wondering what's for lunch. I like that. So I'll put that in there. So yeah, we'll start with, as I did with the outer ecosystems, go with the inner ones. I wanted to map out a food chain, but it's that in depth, and the science on it is only just coming out, so I couldn't. So I've done the best I can to explain it. So with this shows the skin of a human, and you can't really see, but all these are different kinds of parasites, and these are where they are basically on the skin. So in different crevices is different habitats, so there's different species that are doing different things basically. So there's certain species that they feed off sebum, so the oil that comes out of your skin, they feed off that, and the biowaste that they make, it basically creates a film that protects you from pathogens. But if you have too many oils, it makes too much of it, and then it causes a reaction on your skin. So that's sort of the same balance that you need in nature. There's other ones that are like soldiers, basically, the guards, and anything that lands on you, they attack it. There's some that are commensalistic, that just live there. They don't cause any harm, but they're just living in a habitat that suits them. And then there's obviously the parasitic ones, which usually on the skin is fungus, which is like athlete's foot and stuff like that. Yeah. So the skin is quite abundant, but then you get into the gut, and then that's when you really see the jungle. I see the gut as the jungle. There's the diversity in there is amazing, of beneficial and unbeneficial. And the same if you're eating unorganic food, basically vegetables, you're taking in the pesticides, and the pesticides, the glyphosate, is killing the microorganisms within you. And there's certain microorganisms within you that have got a resistance because of years and years and years of antibiotic abuse. They built up a resistance, so you end up killing off the good ones, and then the bad ones colonise. And that's when stuff like Crohn's disease and IBS start to develop. And then everyone's like, why am I sick, why am I sick? Antibiotics, kill off the microbiome, the good microbiome. And the other ones thrive, basically. So there's different ones, bifidobacterium, like you've probably heard that on adverts. Yakult yogurt, that's the bacteria goes in there. And it helps to regulate levels of other bacteria in the gut. It modulates the immune responses to invading. So basically, it's the alarm, bifidobacterium. It manages the other microbes, and then it says there's something here. It tells the immune system there's something there. And then there's E. coli, which is basically each microbe has a different responsibility. So some for vitamin K, some are for vitamin D, some of them for vitamin E. They all have their own place in absorbing them and then making them bioavailable for you. Just like with the soil, it's exactly the same. You're the plant, and the more diversity of microbes, the more conversion of nutrients and minerals, the healthier the plant. And then you've got lactobacilli, which is the one that's generally in breast milk, which is lactic acid. It's an anaerobic bacteria, so that's why it's important to breastfeed, because you take on your mother's microbes, basically. When you come through the vagina, you take on your mother's microbes, and then they're topped up with the breast milk. And the lactic acid bacteria, it doesn't really survive in the stomach, it only really survives in the colon. So taking it into the stomach, it'll generally migrate to the colon, to where it's most useful, which is basically turning fibre into short chain fatty acids, which is propionate and acetic acid and stuff like that, and then that arms your immune system. So when people are on the juice fast and they're just having juice plus, they're missing out on the fibre, which is missing out on short chain fatty acids, which is basically leaving their immune system weaker than it could be. And that's the importance of these things. And then you've got the other ones which are unbeneficial, which they're always there, they're always waiting. They're just like in a city, you have your good people and your bad people, and depending on how much control you give the bad people, depends on how much control they have. So it's important to arm your good one, because they're always waiting to colonise and take over the host and parasitise the host. You got the colon as well, which is where the lactic acid bacteria lives. This is a diagram of the short chain fatty acids, acetate, butyrate and propionate. And you can have these in like supplements and stuff like that, but if you haven't got the right microbes there to sort them out and to send them to the right places, they'll just go through you. And it's the same with vitamins. So when you're taking vitamin capsules and stuff like that, if you haven't got the balanced microbiome, then you're not absorbing these minerals. And then there's another slightly in-depth one showing how much it does. It stimulates cell growth, regulates the esoteric nervous system, the immune system, and creates cytokines and anti-inflammatory effects. So basically the short chain fatty acids that are created from fibre are one of the most important dietary the dietary needs. Basically that's what it's turning out to be, and it's all very new, it's all very like disconnected, all the information now, because the ecosystem's inside you, it's pitch black and it's just micro. It's really hard to connect all the dots, basically. And then you've got the genital ecosystem, which, like I say, is the lactobacillus, which is the lactic acid, which creates lactic acid and hydrogen peroxide, which is really harmful to pathogens and to parasites. So if that system's working well, anything that lands in that area, it can't survive in that environment because of what the waste products that the lactobacillus are creating. And I'll just rush on a little bit. So yeah, bad practices, as I did with the outside ecosystems, with the ecosystems inside. There's too much sugar. Too much sugar is bad because it feeds the bad microbes. It's too much refined sugar basically. Undercooked meat, microbes such as flatworm, they live in undercooked meat. Fast food, which is sugar anyway, and dairy as well. We're just not supposed to absorb it, so it just feeds the bacteria that should live in cows, and cows have a lot different biology to us basically. So also it makes an acidic environment. An acidic environment is where parasites thrive, which is what's there. So yeah, the parasites within us, you've got the flatworm, which can grow to like 14 meters long. Malaria, which is a parasite. They call it a disease, but it's actually a parasite that affects the blood. Oops. There's always one thing, isn't there? There we go. Then there's liver fluke. Don't know if you've heard of liver fluke, but that attacks the liver. And then I can't remember what that one is. Let's see now. Oh yeah, Toxoplasma. Like, has anyone heard of Toxoplasma?
Yeah, you get it from catching.
Exactly. Basically, it goes into rodents, and similar to what Nicola was talking about with the fungi and the ants. And the rodents who get Toxoplasma, they go looking for cats, and then a cat eats it, and then the cat takes it into a human house, and then it infects a human, and that's its tactic basically of spreading itself, mind control. So yeah, little mind controller within us is Candida, and I see Candida as the Grim Reaper. It's naturally within us. It's a natural part of our system, and it's just a yeast in the body initially. But the reason I see it as the Grim Reaper is if you abuse your body, if you just like with the ecosystems have their self-destruct sort of thing, if you abuse the body, it gets stronger, and if it gets stronger, it takes over, and it starts sending signals to your brain which make you have anxiety, so that you comfort eat, and you comfort eat sugar, which is its favourite food. So it's an endless cycle of pushing buttons. So you get cravings, which we'll go on to this one. You get cravings for carbohydrates, you get cravings for sugars, you get cravings for beer, you get cravings for the things that comfort you, but you don't need comforting, you need healing of this overgrowth. So it's not necessarily a bad thing. It has its place in the system. It breaks you down after you die, but if you abuse your system, it takes control and it makes your life hell. And a big part of it is it's very resistant to antibiotics. So people have antibiotics, it kills off your microbiome, and then suddenly you go ill and you're like, why am I ill? So you take more antibiotics and it kills off your microbiome, and then this thing just gets stronger and stronger and stronger. And in my own healing journey, after 2.5 years of being vegan, I was still 60% Candida, and then it took herbs and different medicines to get myself well, and to get myself to be able to even look people in the eye, never mind speak in front of them. So these are different things. Leaky gut, which releases toxins into the bloodstream, weakens the immune system, infection and disease. Yeah, it's basically, I think it causes cancer, to be honest. So there's no backup for that, because everything in science is peer reviewed. And I think it's the secret of how the government have gained control of people through the diet, because sugar's in everything, yeast is in everything, and it makes you crazy basically. It makes you full of anxiety, full of fear, and angry and stressed, but it's only because you can't cope with what's going on inside.
There is a book, there is a oncologist, Simon Stini, whatever his name is, that is cancer is fungus, and he's found that inside the tumors there's candida.
Yeah, that's what I believe. I believe it's just a group of fungus that's got too much control, and cancer feeds on sugar. But yeah, it is something that
Cancer cells do spread a lot faster with sugar,
yeah.
which is why I was told to use, because cancer cells like themselves, to use maple syrup.
Mm.
You take B17 10 minutes before,
Mm.
because it takes that long to get into the bloodstream,
Yeah.
pushing it.
And it's sort of like a trap.
Bicarbonate soda and the maple syrup in the water. And what that does is, because the cancer cells like the sugar,
Mm.
the bicarbonate soda starts to dissolve the cancer cells by making the blood
Alkaline.
alkaline rather than acidic.
Yeah.
The B17 actually attacks the cells.
Exactly. Exactly.
That's
But-
basically what you were saying there.
Mhm.
But
Yeah, it just alkalises the system and it can't survive. So, like, finding out that parasites, they thrive in stagnant, deoxygenated, acidic environments. So these sort of connections came to me. So there's the parasite crash inside. So parasites take until the system crashes, the host dies, and then your soul will be reborn into another thing. So not enough food for the ecosystem managers, which is the bacteria. Too much sugar, junk food creates perfect acidic environment for parasites who keep asking for more. Parasites take until the system crashes, and then the system is reborn. So it's sort of like a self-destruct button for nature and for the body, that if shit starts to get bad, the parasites just basically take everything back. Parasite crash in nature, we put pressure on the apex predators. Population growth of primary consumers, so the ones below them consume everything and then release them as nutrients, which is the sugar in the body. Too much nutrient release into the system causes overgrowth of flora. When flora dies, it becomes food for bacteria. Bacteria absorb oxygen, creating an oxyurostagnation. Perfect habitat for parasites who take until the system crashes and is reborn. So the nutrients in nature, the sugar in the body, and then I thought the parasite crash, because economy, it comes from ecosystem. So too much money into the economy causes the perfect environment for parasites, which is the corporations. Parasites take control of the economy managers, which is the government. Taken from the system until it crashes. They're all reflecting each other, and I think that's what's going on now. So we need to stop putting sugar in the body. We need to stop doing bad practices in agriculture, which is putting nutrients into the ecosystem, and we need to start giving money to the corporations. We need to give money to the Roots Project or to local organisations. But that's just like something that came to me. Identifying imbalances. So there's many. It's pretty much every single symptom that you can get on there, and I believe everything's due to the microbial imbalances in your body, because they're that important to the ecosystem. Just like the wolves in Yellowstone, the microbes in your body, they manage everything. You have other parts, but they break down what comes in from the mouth, which is like sort of Shiva's where the universe was born, to bacteria, or mouth is that, and everything that it gets comes from there. And depending on what you put in, depends on what they break up for your body, for the ecosystem. So yeah, all these are basically symptoms for bacteria imbalances. Another way to do it is a Mora test, which is a massive change in my life, and it has the bioresonance of every parasite, every disease, allergies, and also deficiencies in there, and they send the sound frequency of all these things up your meridian lines to the organs where they affect, and then if that sound is cancelled out, it means that frequency is within your body. And I had that, and I had 2 parasites, and I was 60% candida, and then I got the right herbs to heal it, and then it completely changed my life, and I could look people in the eyes, because I couldn't before, because my diet when I was younger was terrible. I watched Winnie the Pooh when I was about 3 or 4, and there was an episode, I don't know if anyone watched it, where Tigger, who was a carnivore, which obviously he's going to hate vegetables, but he got caught in a carrot soup, and the line he said was, "Vegetables are bad for you," and I took it on, and I didn't eat vegetables for 20 years. I was just eating shit, basically. So I got ill, I started to get ill, and then I started to look into why I was ill, and then I changed to vegan, and then I started to get better. And then I had a Mora test, which told me the problem, and then I got the medicines to heal it. With that, I'm able to talk in front of people.